In 1954, a German engineer bolted hydraulic rams onto a set of wheels and changed digging forever. 70 years later, his machine's descendants and hundreds of their battered, grease-caked cousins from the back half of the 20th century are still clawing into the earth, long after the factories that built them shut their doors. Forgotten in fields, rescued from scrapyards, still starting on the first turn of the key, here are 10 stubborn old excavators that flat out refuse to retire. Number 10. The Komatsu PC 200. Let's start not with the rarest machine on this list, but with the one you're still most likely to see actually working. A Japanese digger that turns up on job sites on every continent, decades after it left the factory. The company is Komatsu, founded in 1921 in the town of Komatsu, Japan, as a small ironworks serving a local coal mine. For its first 40 years, it built machine tools, presses, and bulldozers, but in 1963, it signed a technology license with an American giant that already turns up again and again on this very list, Bucyrus Erie. That deal taught Komatsu how to build hydraulic excavators, and in 1968, the first ones rolled off the line. It's a neat thread, the same Bucyrus name behind the great cable shovels and walking draglines elsewhere in this countdown also helped seed the machine sitting at number 10. Out of that grew the PC series, and its most famous member, the 20-ton class PC 200. Since the 1970s, it has run through generation after generation, the -1, the -3, the -5, the -6, on and on, becoming one of the best-selling excavators of its size anywhere in the world. And Komatsu grew right along with it, into the second largest maker of construction equipment on Earth, behind only Caterpillar. So why does the PC 200 refuse to retire? Because the old ones simply will not stop. Beaten-up PC 200s from the 1980s and 1990s are still grafting for a living right now in India, across Southeast Asia, in Africa, in South America, clocking hours most machines would never survive. They've earned a reputation as some of the toughest, most fixable diggers ever built, straightforward hydraulics, an engine that keeps going, and parts you can still get almost anywhere. Rebuilt, resold, exported, and worked half to death, a 30 or 40-year-old PC 200 is one of the commonest old survivors you'll find turning dirt today. Not the first hydraulic excavator, and not the biggest, just one of the hardest to kill. Number 9. The Hymac 580. Now to Britain, and a machine that old-timers still speak about with genuine affection, a tough little digger that simply will not die. The Hymac 580 started life as an American design called the Hi-Ho. When the American operation stopped building it in 1962, a firm in Rhymney, South Wales took over the rights and began manufacturing their own version. The result was the Hymac 580, a tracked 360-degree hydraulic excavator that became a British icon. The design was good enough to win a British Design Council Award in 1967, and Hymac's own literature boldly billed it as a world-first fully hydraulic tracked machine over the production run. From the mid-1960s into the late 1980s, more than 10,000 of the 580 range poured out of that South Wales factory. The family grew to include the 580B, the 580BT. The letters stood for better tracks, the long-running 580C, and finally the 580B, alongside bigger stablemates like the 1-yard 880 and the huge 1280. For years, the company, part of the Powell Dufferin Group, was Britain's dominant excavator builder. One period advert boasted of 7,500 580s sold. They ran mostly Ford engines, with some Perkins and even a few Rolls-Royce units, and they had a reputation for being almost unbreakable. Enthusiasts describe them as the Land Rover of the digger world. No electronics to go wrong, just valves, nuts, bolts, and hydraulic muscle. If something failed, a competent operator could usually fix it in the field with hand tools. And that simplicity is exactly why the Hymac refuses to retire. Decades after the company itself vanished, huge numbers of these machines are still earning an honest living, doing daily work on farms and small building sites across Britain and Europe, ditch clearing, foundation digging, general graft. They developed such a devoted cult following that a whole spares and restoration industry sprang up around them, and beautifully restored 580s are now shipped to collectors around the world. Many younger operators have never even heard the name Hymac, yet the machine keeps turning up, keeps starting on the first touch of the key, and keeps chewing through the dirt. Not bad for a design pushing 60 years old. Number 8. The Ruston-Bucyrus 22RB. This next one is a proper survivor, a cable-operated machine from the era before hydraulics that stubbornly outlives the fancy diggers that replaced it. Ruston-Bucyrus was a marriage of two giants, the British firm Ruston and Hornsby of Lincoln and the American powerhouse Bucyrus Erie. British-built machines wore the Ruston-Bucyrus name, and the 22RB became their most popular model of all, turned out on a production line basis. The clever bit was its versatility. It was a standard base machine onto which you could bolt whatever front-end gear you needed: a crane jib, a dragline, a face shovel, a clamshell grab, even piling equipment. One machine, a dozen jobs. These are wonderfully analog beasts. A single diesel engine, connected through a maze of clutches, brakes, and rope drums, lets the operator swing the boom, crawl the tracks, and throw the bucket, all by feel. Operators nicknamed the manual versions hydraulic. The Ruston-Bucyrus partnership ran deep too. During the Second World War, the firm even developed a monstrous trench-cutting machine, codenamed Cultivator No. 6, at the personal request of Winston Churchill. And remarkably, the RB lineage never truly ended. The company evolved its cable machines into the hydraulic CH series crawler cranes and piling rigs, still offered into the 2000s. Here's where the refuses to retire part gets real. On a farm in Australia, one owner bought a 22RB back in 2002 to clean silt out of dams during a punishing drought. More than 2 decades later, it's still doing it, sipping tiny amounts of diesel, shifting a surprising amount of mud with its 1-yard bucket, and as the owner puts it, firing up every single time it's needed. In Devon, England, another 22RB sat abandoned beside a pond for more than 10 years, its engine block filled with rainwater, slowly being reclaimed by nature. A crew of enthusiasts dragged it out with a wrecker, flushed and re-oiled the engine, and hit the starter. After a few coughs and a cloud of smoke, it ran, and it's now demonstrated digging in front of crowds at the Welland Steam Rally. A machine written off decades ago, still swinging its bucket for an audience. Number 7. The O&K RH5 and the RH dynasty. Back to Germany now for a small machine from 1961, whose descendants literally move mountains to this day. The company was Orenstein and Koppel, universally known as O&K, a German firm founded back in the 1870s that had built railway equipment and locomotives long before it turned to excavators. In 1961, the same pivotal year that hydraulic excavators really came of age, O&K launched the RH5, their very first hydraulic excavator. On its own, the RH5 was a modest machine, but it was the first link in one of the most extraordinary bloodlines in earth-moving history. That RH designation stuck, and over the following decades, O&K scaled the concept up and up and up. The RH line grew from a small construction digger into a family of colossal hydraulic mining excavators, machines with buckets the size of a garage, working the biggest surface mines on the planet. The line eventually produced the O&K RH400, for years recognized as the largest hydraulic excavator in the world. When Caterpillar absorbed the technology through its purchase of buckets, that same monster was rebadged and continued in production as the Cat 6S9. The DNA of that little 1961 RH5 is still being manufactured today, so this entry is a lineage that refuses to retire. The giant O&K RH mining excavators built through the 1980s and 1990s are famously long-lived. These are machines a mine will rebuild and keep running for decades rather than replace, because replacing them costs a fortune and stops production. Across coal, copper, and iron mines around the world, O&K RH excavators from the last century are still loading haul trucks every day. From a humble digger introduced in 1961 grew a dynasty that never stopped working, and at the very top end, never stopped growing either. Number 6. The Ruston-Bucyrus 3080RB and 54RB quarry shovels. We're returning to those magnificent British rope machines because the 22RB had bigger brothers, and they're some of the most spectacular survivors of the lot. Where the 22RB was the jack of all trades, the 38RB and the larger 54RB were the quarry heavyweights. Ruston-Bucyrus built a whole standardized family. The early 10-2RB, 17-2RB upgraded through the 1960s into the main selling range of the 22, 30, 38, 61 and 71-2RB, right up to the massive 110-2RB and 152RB and full walking draglines. The 38RB and 54RB were the big cable-operated face shovels that chewed rock straight out of the working face, loading it into trucks and railway wagons. In the 1960s, this was the serious end of British quarrying. Huge rope-driven machines that demanded real skill to operate, because every movement came from that same clever, maddening tangle of clutches and drums driven by one engine. There's a beautiful piece of continuity here. Threlkeld Quarry in the English Lake District was itself worked by Ruston-Bucyrus excavators after the Second World War. When the quarry closed, it became a museum, and today it's home to the Vintage Excavator Trust, a group that has gathered around 80 machines. Among them are Ruston-Bucyrus face shovels, including the 38M. And these machines aren't stuffed and mounted behind glass. That's the whole point of what refuses to retire here. On the Trust's working weekends, these quarry rope shovels are fired up and put back to work, digging in the very same quarry they were designed to attack, in front of visitors who travel from around the world to watch. There is almost no one left who remembers how to conduct that mechanical symphony. The simultaneous throttle, clutch and brake work needed to make a rope shovel dig cleanly. The volunteers keeping these 38RBs and their siblings running are preserving not just the steel, but the lost human skill of operating them. A whole quarry's worth of 1960s iron, still tearing at the rock face for anyone who comes to watch. Number 5. Priestman and NCK rope draglines. Staying with the British rope machine world, because one more branch of that family tree deserves its own moment, the draglines. A dragline works in reverse to a shovel. Instead of shoving a bucket into a bank, it hurls the bucket out on ropes, then drags it back toward the machine to scoop up material. Brilliant for digging below itself, clearing pits and dredging waterways. Britain had two proud names in this game. Priestman Brothers, rooted in Hull and Lincolnshire, built rope-operated draglines and grabs, and even pioneered a clever adjustable long-reach design called the variable counterbalance. And NCK, with machines like the NCK 605, was another respected British maker of rope cranes and excavators. Both brands are represented in preservation. And once again, the guardian is the Vintage Excavator Trust at Threlkeld. The trust was formed back in 1998 by a small band of enthusiasts, and its founding mission was written down in black and white: to acquire, restore, and crucially, keep in working order a comprehensive collection of rope-operated excavators and to demonstrate to the public exactly how they worked. Their collection now runs to around 80 machines. The bloodlines here run deep into British industrial history. NCK's ancestor, Ransomes and Rapier, was building draglines under license from America's Marion Company back in the 1920s, and Priestman's clever long-reach design was considered valuable enough that Ruston-Bucyrus bought the rights to it in That phrase, "keep in working order," is what puts these machines on the list. The Priestman and NCK draglines aren't static relics. When the working weekends come around, they swing their long booms and cast their buckets across the old quarry floor, ropes singing and drums spinning in a display almost nobody alive still performs for a living. These machines represent the forgotten middle chapter of digging history, the age between hissing steam and modern hydraulics, and they survive today purely because a handful of dedicated people refuse to let that chapter be scrapped and forgotten. Some are pushing 70 years old, and they still answer the levers. Number 4. The JCB backhoe. MK1 to 3CX, now for a machine so successful that its name stopped being a brand and became an ordinary word for digger. The story starts with Joseph Cyril Bamford, who founded his company in 1945 in a rented lock-up garage in Staffordshire, England, building tipping trailers out of wartime scrap metal. His personal motto was "Jamais content," French for never satisfied. In 1948, he built the Major Loader, the first European hydraulic loader, and then in 1953 came the moment that changed construction worldwide. Bamford took a hydraulic excavator arm and bolted it onto the back of a front-loading tractor, and in doing so invented the world's first backhoe loader, the Mech 1. For the first time, one machine carried a loading shovel on the front and a digging arm on the back. Production started slowly. Only about 35 were built in 19. Then it exploded. The Mech 1 gave way to the Hydra Digger in 1957 and the JCB-4 in 1960, which introduced the two-lever backhoe controls that became a company signature. In 1963, JCB launched the 3C, a machine so well-resolved it's still regarded as a design classic, and the following year built its first crawler excavator, the JCB-7. In 1980, the 3CX Sitemaster arrived and went on to become the best-selling backhoe loader in history. By 1985, the firm was celebrating its 100,000th backhoe. All told, JCB has now built well over 900,000 backhoes, passing the 1 million mark in recent years from more than 20 factories worldwide, including plants in the UK, India, and Brazil. That scale is why the JCB refuses to retire, in the most literal, everyday sense. In Britain, and above all in India, one of JCB's biggest markets, people don't ask for an excavator or a backhoe. They ask for a JCB, whatever brand it actually is. The name became the machine, and the old iron is everywhere. 60s and 70s JCB-3s and early 3CXs are still grafting away on farms, small holdings, and building sites across the world, decades after they left the line. Simple, fixable, and stubbornly useful, these diggers keep working long after their operators expected them to be scrapped, an entire dynasty of machines that genuinely never stopped. Number 3. The Bucyrus, Erie, and Marion walking draglines. Time to go truly enormous, to the electric walking giants of the great coal boom, some of which are still striding across mines half a century later. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo sent demand for coal soaring almost overnight, and American power stations needed vast amounts of it fast. The manufacturers of giant walking draglines, chiefly Bucyrus, Erie, and Marion, were buried in orders. By the end of 1974, Bucyrus Erie's backlog stood at over $600 million. These are the machines that stripped away the earth covering the coal seams. Colossal electric excavators that don't roll on tracks but walk, lifting and shuffling their millions of pounds forward on huge shoes, dragging a bucket on cables across hundreds of feet. Models like the Bucyrus Erie 2570W became workhorses of the strip mines, swinging buckets well over 100 cubic yards. And here's the crucial thing about these giants: they were never designed to be thrown away. They were engineered to be rebuilt in place indefinitely. The basic mechanical concept of a dragline has barely changed in about 100 years, which means a machine from the 1960s or 1970s can be overhauled, recabled, remotored, and sent straight back to work. That's exactly what refuses to retire here. Draglines from the coal boom era are still walking and digging today. In Florida, the shallow water table makes draglines the ideal tool for phosphate mining, and decades-old machines keep at it there. Coal operators, too, have refurbished and redeployed giant draglines rather than build new. Not all of them made it. The very largest ever built, Big Muskie, a one-of-a-kind Bucyrus Erie 4250W from 1969, stood nearly 22 stories tall, swung a 220 cubic yard bucket big enough to park 2 buses in, and moved over 600 million cubic yards of earth in its 22-year life, twice the volume dug for the entire Panama Canal before it was shut down in 1991 and finally scrapped in 1999. But the ones that stayed useful simply kept going. 50 years on, some of these electric mammoths are still out there, walking a few feet at a time, moving mountains. Number 2. Big Brutus. The Bucyrus Erie 1850B. Our runner-up is the machine that turns refuses to retire into something you can stand next to and gawp at. The largest electric shovel still in existence. Big Brutus is a Bucyrus Erie 1850B. And there was only ever one of them. It was commissioned in 1962 by the Pittsburgh and Midway Coal Mining Company and built at the Bucyrus Erie plant in Milwaukee. The numbers are genuinely difficult to absorb. It stands 16 stories tall, about 160 feet, and weighs 11 million pounds. Its dipper could scoop 90 cubic yards in a single bite. roughly 150 tons, enough to fill 3 full-sized railroad hopper cars in one pass. Getting it to Kansas took 150 railroad cars, and a 52-man crew spent 11 months bolting it together on site. When it fired up in Mine 19 in 1963, it was the second largest operating shovel in the world. It ran entirely on electricity, no diesel, drawing as much power as a town of 15,000 people, and it crawled along at a top speed of about 1/5 of a mile per hour. Its job was to strip the overburden off the coal, reaching down as far as 69 feet with a boom about 150 feet long. It cost $6.5 million, and it was built to run for a quarter of a century or more. It lasted only 11 years. By 1974, the coal at that site was no longer economical, and Big Brutus was switched off. But it was far too enormous to move, so it simply stayed put, and that turned out to be its salvation. While its even larger cousins, machines like the Captain and Big Muskie, were cut up for scrap, Big Brutus was donated to a non-profit, dedicated as a museum in 1985, named a Regional Historic Mechanical Engineering Landmark in 1987, and placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 20. It no longer digs, but it still draws around 25,000 visitors a year to a tiny Kansas town. A machine that was too big to move became far too important to lose. Number 1. Poclain. The TU and the legendary TY45. And our number 1 is the machine that refuses to retire more completely than any other on this list. The French digger, whose name became a synonym for the entire category. It began with a farmer. In 1927, Georges Bataille, an ingenious mechanic obsessed with machinery, set up a workshop in the tiny French town of Le Plessis-Belleville. In 1951, his company Poclain built the TU, one of the very first hydraulic excavators anywhere. It was crude, towed on 2 wheels behind a tractor and unable even to spin all the way around, but it proved the revolutionary idea that hydraulic fluid and cylinders could replace ropes and winches, and that an operator could actually feel the ground through the levers. Then, in 1961, came the machine that made history, the TY45. It was the first Poclain that could fully revolve, a complete 360-degree hydraulic excavator, riding on a distinctive 3-wheeled tricycle undercarriage. Over the next 21 years, Poclain built around 30,000 of them and sold them into more than 120 countries. In Saudi Arabia and across the Gulf, the effect was so total that Poclain simply became the everyday word for an excavator, any brand. The name swallowed the machine. Poclain, the excavator maker, was eventually absorbed by the American firm Case, and its digger line faded. But not before the company had stunned the industry again in 1970 with the EC1000, a 900-horsepower, 125-ton machine that was at the time the largest hydraulic excavator in the world. By then, Poclain had built well over 50,000 excavators since that first TU, and the machines themselves proved almost impossible to kill. Restored TY45s and their tricycle siblings are lovingly kept running by collector clubs across Europe, brought out to rallies to be admired and worked. And it's not just the museum pieces. Everyday Poclains from the 1980s, models like the 75 CKB and 90 CKB, are still found grafting on farms with 13,000 and 14,000 hours on the clock, still starting up, still digging. The hydraulics division, meanwhile, survives to this day as an independent company, Poclain Hydraulics. Think about what that means. Poclain built the machine that helped make the old cable excavators obsolete, and then that very machine refused to leave the field itself. Its name became a word. Its survivors still work. More than 70 years after that first tractor-towed TU, and more than 60 since the TY45 first spun on its tricycle wheels, Poclain is still the purest answer to the question this whole list asks. These were all machines built in a century that told them exactly when to quit. Every one of them refused. If you enjoyed meeting these mechanical diehards, tell me in the comments which one you'd most want to see fired up in person. And stick around, because the world of old iron has plenty more survivors that refuse to stay buried.